Before we get started, I'd like to make a small dedication. The following video and series of videos, in fact, are dedicated to the late great Roger Ebert, who was taken away from us not too long ago. Arguably one of the most influential and important critics of the 20th century of any kind of media, Roger helped redefine and reinvent the concept of film criticism and film reviewing in general, along with his co-host and friend Gene Siskel. Much of reviewing as we know it today owes a huge debt to the both of them, and they will both be sorely missed by film fans, film critics, and overall movie buffs everywhere. Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. That movie nut here with a review for Apocalypse Now, the 1979 war epic starring Martin Sheen, Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, Dennis Hopper, and in one of his first roles, Laurence Fishburne. The story, based on the iconic novel Hearts of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, follows Captain Willard, an American serviceman serving during the Vietnam War, who is called by his superiors on to a top-secret mission along with a few other men to go and find and kill the renegade Colonel Kurtz, who has gone into the Cambodian jungle and has set himself as a god among the natives. Along the way, Willard and his men meet a bunch of strange people and events that encompass the goings-on of the Vietnam War, and as Willard gets closer to Kurtz, the madness only increases. Here we are dealing with an absolute powerhouse cast of actors. Martin Sheen plays our protagonist and pulls it off very well. A man disillusioned with the war, and as he witnesses these increasingly bizarre scenarios, he begins to question himself, the mission, and even Kurtz more and more, pondering on the film's main idea of the insanity of war. And speaking of those scenarios, that's where a number of our big names show up. Duvall plays an all-American colonel who tries to infuse that sort of big bombastic spirit into the battles and his soldiers, throwing up big beach barbecues, asking them to surf while the battle is going on, and even plays a loud operatic piece of music, Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, during an attack on a Vietnamese village, one of the film's most famous scenes. But in doing all of this, he sort of becomes a grotesque parody of that all-American thing, and Duvall really embraces it, making him both darkly humorous, yet also very unsettling. Dennis Hopper plays a crazed photojournalist that Willard meets later in the story, a sort of reverse demented hippie who worships and idolizes Kurtz and all that he has to say. And of course, being Hopper, he nails that maverick between the lines of sanity and insanity perfectly. And of course, the big man himself, both figuratively and literally, is Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz. And though he doesn't show up until much later in the movie and maybe gets, I'd say, about 10-15 minutes of screen time, Brando, being the actor that he is, cements himself and grabs you with his performance. That is both reserved and very educated, unlike a lot of the more bombastic, lowbrow, common man soldiers that you see in the rest of the movie, but he's also very unnerving and uneasy, his slow, deliberate delivery of his lines making you listen to every word he says and giving him a very strong sense of authority and importance, essential for this kind of character. And just to cap off, we even have the likes of Harrison Ford and a young Laurence Fishburne in small roles as soldiers, but both do a good job for what they have, especially Fishburne, who is both the youngest character in the film and the youngest actor on the crew. And he definitely brings that wide-eyed, unscarred quality that only makes you abhor it more when you see what happens to him later. From a visual standpoint, the film is absolutely gorgeous, not just in terms of the sheer size and scope of the battles and the jungles, but also in the use of color and shadows, especially later when we get to Brando, giving him that sort of unnatural, almost majestic quality, the shadows streaking across his body like some kind of spirit or spectre, and allowing us to really focus on what he's saying while most of his body is obscured by darkness. But just as important, in fact more so than in a lot of films that I've seen, is the sound work here. Both the editing done mainly by the great Walter Murch, and the music, co-composed by both Coppola and his father Carmine, is absolutely outstanding. Even from the opening scene, we slowly hear the helicopters coming, the sound gradually going from a very slowed down pace to normal, and then fading into the Doors song, The End, while we see a jungle being destroyed and bombed by helicopters. In just that minute or so of footage, the film has set up the strange, surreal, almost psychedelic quality, style and tone. In that short span of time, Coppola has already told us a lot about the film, whereas most directors would take maybe 3 to 4 minutes to set up everything. And it's a perfect union of images and sound work. And in fact, this was one of the films that pioneered the 5.1 system. Murch's sound work making the film feel open and alive, with sounds that are both very close and yet far off in the distance, making you feel like you're watching more a window on the world than you are just a straightforward film. You feel like you're actually experiencing something. And finally, we come to the script, which was written by both Coppola and John Milius, who you might know as the man behind Red Dawn and the original Conan film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. To say the least, it's absolutely brilliant. The film's central idea, as I mentioned before, is the insanity of war and how seemingly good and ordinary men can be turned mad by it. And the fact that the film is structured in that classical Odyssey kind of way allows you to gradually see, as do our main characters, that as you go deeper and deeper into the war, things start getting madder and madder. And the question of humanity almost dissolves and things become feral, visceral and animalistic. Going from the surfing, all-American crazed colonel played by Duvall, to a stage show with Playboy bunnies where the soldiers all burst onto the stage like animals, all wanting to satiate their lust. And even when we finally get to Kurtz, where we arrive at this ruined temple and we see his followers dressed like primitive natives in loincloths and with spears, almost as if we'd been thrown back in time. Coppola and Milius create a fascinating study of this subject. While it may not be super realistic like many of its famous peers like Oliver Stone's Platoon or Casualties of War, that's almost not the point. Here we're looking at it more from a psychological viewpoint. And the film is not afraid to get violent either. In fact, there's a very unsettling and disturbing scene when Willard and the crew shoot up a boat of fishermen because they believe they're occulting weapons, when in fact it turns out that they were hiding a puppy. Just the fact that Willard's crew are so paranoid about what's going to happen to them perfectly illustrates and reflects the kind of paranoia that soldiers would have felt in the situation, and also makes them feel more three-dimensional. And throughout, Willard is constantly reflecting on his mission and the various documents and dossiers his superiors have given to him about Kurtz. And throughout, as he sees these increasingly strange scenarios and meets these strange soldiers and other people, he starts to question more and more the validity of what he's doing. And these internal monologues are actually quite fascinating, and they give us a greater understanding, not just of the situation, but also of Willard himself as a character. And we see and we get inside his head and understand why he makes the choices he makes. And trying to understand why Kurtz would make the choice that he did. Again, that sort of going into the unknown, the peeling of the banana effectively, is what makes Apocalypse Now so interesting. And by the end, you feel like you've really been on an experience. You don't just feel like you've watched a film. thanks to both the writing here, but also the filmmaking quality that I've talked about before, the strange psychedelic approach that Coppola takes. It is a slow burn film, but it is very rewarding, and it's fascinating just to see what happens next to these characters and how strange the Vietnam War is. Coppola sticks to his guns, and he gives the film a lot of meat. He hooks your attention on a visual level with his strange style, but then he entertains your mind with a story that does ask questions about what war can do to a person and how far some people will go. And it all climaxes into one satisfying and engaging experience that is unlike any other you'll have with any war film. And so, to conclude, I must give Apocalypse Now the only rating it deserves, a gold star. This is easily one of the most unique and ambitious war films, in fact films, you'll ever see. Its strange visual style, its amazing sound work, its top-notch performances, and its compelling yet cerebral story will engage you from beginning to end, and I cannot recommend this enough. Join me next time when we'll look at the extended director's cut, Apocalypse Now Redux, and then after that we'll look at the behind-the-scenes documentary, Hearts of Darkness. See you there.